The house no longer whispered, not because it was empty, but because it had nothing left to teach me. The silence felt full now, settled, complete, unbroken. It didn't press against my thoughts or demand interpretation. It simply existed, steady and calm, like a chapter that had reached its natural ending. I walked through each room one last time, not searching, not remembering, not checking for unfinished emotions. The walls stood firm. The air felt light. There were no shadows stretching unnaturally, no corners holding unanswered questions. Everything felt resolved. I realized then that the house had never been the source of my fear or growth. It had only reflected what I carried inside. When I doubted myself, it echoed doubt. When I stayed silent, it grew loud. When I waited, it waited with me. And now that I was steady, it remained still. For years, waiting had defined me, waiting for understanding, waiting for validation, waiting for someone else to decide when I was enough. That waiting taught me patience, but it also delayed my life. It kept me standing in place while the world continued moving. Standing there now, I felt no urge to wait anymore. I didn't need signs, I didn't need reassurance, I didn't need closure from the house or from anyone else. What I had been searching for was never outside of me. I opened the front door, and the outside air met me gently. The world beyond the house looked exactly the same, but I wasn't. I stepped forward without hesitation, without looking back, without fear of leaving something unfinished behind. Nothing followed me. Nothing called me back. The lessons were learned, the echoes were gone. The house remained quiet, its purpose fulfilled. And I no longer waited, because I had finally arrived. One evening, I walked past the mirror without stopping. There was no hesitation in my step, no quiet pull asking me to turn back. My body moved naturally, as if it had always known this moment would come. The mirror stayed behind me, silent and ordinary, no longer asking for my attention. That was the moment I understood. I no longer needed confirmation. I no longer searched for permission, neither from reflections nor from people. The mirror had become what it always should have been, just glass. It held no answers, no approval, no power over who I was. And realizing that felt like releasing a weight I had carried for years without noticing. The house felt different too, warm, ordinary, grounded, not empty, not heavy, just complete. The rooms no longer echoed old emotions or unfinished thoughts. They didn't remind me of who I used to be or who I tried to become for others. They simply existed, calm and steady. Freedom didn't arrive loudly. There was no dramatic release, no overwhelming sense of victory. It came quietly, settling into me like something familiar returning home. It felt real because it didn't need to be explained. It didn't ask to be noticed or celebrated. I moved through the house slowly, aware of my breath, aware of my steps. I wasn't fixing anything. I wasn't checking for mistakes. I noticed how calm my thoughts felt, how they no longer raced ahead searching for approval or reassurance. Everything felt aligned in a way I had never experienced before. For so long I had waited to be understood, waited to be appreciated, waited to be chosen. That waiting had shaped my life more than any choice I consciously made. It had kept me standing still while time moved forward. Standing there, in that quiet house, the truth became clear and undeniable. I was free because I no longer waited to be chosen. I had chosen myself. The lesson revealed itself slowly, not as a single realization, but as a pattern I could no longer ignore. The people who benefited most from my silence were the ones most unsettled by my voice. They didn't always say it directly. Sometimes it showed in hesitation, sometimes in withdrawal, sometimes in quiet discomfort. And I didn't rush to fix it. The house felt unchanged by these shifts. Its silence stayed calm, consistent, grounded. It didn't react to loss or approval. That steadiness taught me something important. My life was not meant to be shaped by other people's comfort. I noticed how my body responded when I spoke honestly. At first, fear appeared, quick and familiar. My chest tightened, my thoughts raced, but the fear didn't stay. It loosened its grip each time I chose clarity over silence. One afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror and realized something had ended. I wasn't searching my reflection for reassurance anymore. I looked only long enough to recognize myself. That was enough. The house seemed to understand this shift. The silence felt complete now. Not waiting, not watching, just present. I learned that boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're lines that show where you end and where others begin. And clarity, I realized, often feels threatening to those who rely on confusion to feel secure. The fear of being misunderstood no longer felt like my responsibility. I didn't need to correct every assumption or explain every choice. My life didn't require permission or agreement. As night settled in, the house grew darker and quieter. I turned off the lights without hesitation, without replaying conversations in my head. The space held me without question. And in that calm, one truth became undeniable. People who benefit from your silence will fear your voice. That fear was never mine to carry. I met people again, but this time, something was different. I noticed it immediately in the way I listened. I heard their words without losing my own thoughts. I responded without rushing, without bending myself to fit what I thought they expected. Conversations no longer felt like performances. They felt real. I helped when I wanted to, not when I felt obligated. I spoke when something mattered, not just to fill space. And for the first time, I noticed how much energy that saved me. I didn't leave interactions feeling drained or invisible. I left feeling present. Some people adjusted easily. They respected the pauses. They noticed the change and met it with curiosity instead of resistance. With them, connection felt balanced, mutual, safe. Others didn't know what to do with the new distance. My calm unsettled them. My boundaries confused them. When I didn't immediately explain myself or soften my words, something shifted. They became quieter, more distant, and instead of chasing that distance, I let it exist. When I returned home after those encounters, the house felt steady. The silence didn't question me. It didn't react to who stayed in my life and who quietly stepped away. It simply held space for who I was becoming. I moved through the room slowly, noticing how grounded everything felt. The mirror no longer demanded attention. It reflected without expectation, without commentary. Just a familiar face moving freely through familiar space. That evening, I sat alone and reflected on how much I had feared change. I believed that if I altered myself, I would lose connection. But what I was losing now wasn't connection, it was imbalance. The house remained still, as if agreeing without needing to confirm it aloud. For the first time, I understood something clearly. Peace doesn't require everyone to stay. It only requires honesty with yourself. I stood in front of the mirror, my bare feet against the cool floor, the soft glow resting on my reflection. My face looked calm, more familiar than it had in years. There was no distortion, no judgment staring back at me, just presence. The reflection spoke, but not with sound. You are not cruel. You are complete. The words didn't echo or repeat. They settled gently, like a truth I had always known but never allowed myself to accept. I felt something loosen inside my chest, a tightness I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I understood then how deeply I had confused boundaries with cruelty, how often I believed that choosing myself meant harming others. The mirror held none of that belief. It reflected someone steady, someone whole, someone no longer shrinking to remain acceptable. The glow began to fade slowly, as if it wanted to be sure I had received what mattered. The light softened, then disappeared entirely. The mirror returned to what it had always been, ordinary glass, quiet and still. The house remained silent, but the silence felt warmer now, supportive, as if something important had been resolved without needing explanation or resistance. I returned to bed and slept deeply. There were no dreams this time, no voices, no unfinished doors pulling me backward. My body rested without tension, without alertness, without fear. When morning came, the air felt lighter, the light through the windows felt gentler. The mirror didn't draw my attention, it had nothing left to show me. As I moved through the house, I noticed how different my steps felt, more certain, more grounded. The guilt that once knocked so loudly felt distant, easy to ignore. For the first time, rest didn't feel like avoidance, it felt deserved. I realized then that healing doesn't always arrive through effort or struggle. Sometimes it arrives the moment you stop arguing with who you are. The house stayed quiet, and I carried that quiet forward with me. Days passed, and the house continued to feel lighter. The silence no longer pressed against me the way it once had. There were no sudden sounds, no movements in the corners of my vision. On the outside, everything seemed calm, almost ordinary. But inside me, something restless began to surface. Whenever I tried to rest, old fears appeared. They came quietly, slipping into my thoughts when I wasn't prepared. Guilt returned in familiar forms, asking questions I had answered 100 times before. What if they think you've changed too much? What if they think you've become selfish? The thoughts didn't shout, they lingered. At night, sleep brought uneasy dreams. I dreamed of doors I had never fully closed, doors I kept returning to even though nothing waited behind them anymore. In those dreams, voices followed me, not angry, not accusing, just confused. They asked why I wasn't the same, why I no longer stayed, why I had stopped explaining myself. I woke one night with my heart beating fast, the room dark and unfamiliar. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the quiet settled around me again. That was when I noticed the mirror. It was glowing faintly. Not bright, not frightening, just enough to be seen. The light didn't spill across the room or disturb the shadows. It stayed soft, contained, deliberate. Fear tried to rise in me, but it didn't last. This felt different from before. The glow wasn't demanding attention. It wasn't warning me of anything. It felt inviting, as if it wasn't there to challenge me but to meet me where I stood. I sat up slowly, watching the reflection shift as I moved. The house remained completely silent, as though it was holding space rather than reacting. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel the urge to turn away. I stood and took a step toward the mirror, and the house stayed still. Morning brought clarity I hadn't expected. Not answers, awareness. The familiar voice of guilt returned quickly, whispering reminders of what I should be doing, who I should be checking on, how I should explain my quiet. The thoughts arrived automatically, practiced over years of repetition. This time, I didn't obey them. The house felt steady as I moved through it, unchanged by my refusal to rush. The silence didn't judge me. It didn't push me forward or pull me back. It simply made room, and in that space, I felt something unfamiliar: choice. I passed the mirror and paused, not out of habit, but curiosity. My reflection didn't look disappointed or demanding. It looked patient, as if waiting for me to decide whether I would keep abandoning myself for comfort that wasn't mine. I stepped away. Throughout the day, I practiced small acts of restraint. I delayed responses. I said no without adding explanations. Each time, my body reacted with brief fear, followed by relief. The house responded with calm. No tension, no reaction, just presence. By evening, the quiet felt supportive rather than heavy, like a steady hand at my back, reminding me I didn't need to prove anything to exist here. The mirror no longer pulled at my attention. It waited without expectation. I understood something important then. The house wasn't testing me, it was reflecting me. When I stayed grounded, it stayed still. When I honored myself, the space honored me back. As night settled in, I turned off the lights without hesitation, without replaying the day for mistakes. The darkness felt gentle, restful. For the first time, trust replaced urgency. Not trust in the house, but in myself. And that felt like the beginning of something real. The days that followed felt strangely unfamiliar, even though nothing around me had changed. The house looked the same, the rooms held their shape, but the air carried a different weight, as if it was responding to thoughts I hadn't spoken out loud. I noticed it most in moments when I tried to fall back into my old rhythm. I reached for my phone too quickly, ready to reply, ready to offer, ready to fix. Each time, something inside me hesitated. The pause felt uncomfortable, almost wrong. I had trained myself to move without thinking, to stay useful before anyone could question my presence. Now that instinct felt exposed. The house grew quiet in a way that felt observant rather than heavy. I sat at the dining table one afternoon, hands resting on the surface, with nothing demanding my attention. No one needed me. No task waited. The stillness pressed against me, urging me to fill it, to justify my time. Instead, I stayed. The discomfort rose fast. My chest tightened. Thoughts rushed in, reminding me of all the ways I could be doing more, helping more, being more. But beneath that noise, I felt something else. Exhaustion. Not from effort, but from constant readiness. The mirror in the hallway reflected light softly. I didn't look at it directly, but I felt its presence, like it was watching to see whether I would escape the feeling or sit with it. I chose to sit. The house didn't react. No creaks, no whispers, just silence holding its place. Slowly the tension eased. The air felt lighter, as if the space approved of my stillness, not as a reward, but as alignment. I realized then how often I had mistaken movement for purpose, how easily I believed my value depended on being needed. Sitting there, doing nothing, felt unfamiliar, but honest. When I finally stood and walked through the rooms, I didn't rush. I didn't adjust anything. Each step felt intentional, grounded. The house accepted it without resistance. That night, I slept without dreams. That night, sleep came in fragments. My body rested, but my thoughts refused to settle. Memories surfaced without invitation, moments when I said yes while wanting to say no, moments when silence felt safer than honesty. The house responded with faint sounds, subtle shifts, as if it were listening rather than interrupting. I woke before sunrise, the room dim and unfamiliar for a moment. The heaviness returned slowly, like a habit reclaiming its place. Then I noticed the mirror again, standing exactly where it always had, catching the first trace of light. I felt drawn to it, not out of curiosity, but expectation. I stood and walked closer. My reflection looked ordinary, calm even, yet my eyes held a question I had never allowed myself to ask. Who am I when no one needs me? The thought unsettled me. My sense of worth had always been tied to usefulness. Without that, I felt undefined. The house creaked softly, not a warning, not a threat, just acknowledgement. I realized then that the discomfort wasn't coming from the house at all. It was coming from the space I had never occupied, the space where my needs existed without apology. I didn't make promises that morning. I didn't decide to change everything. I simply noticed. I noticed how quickly guilt appeared when I rested. I noticed how unfamiliar it felt to exist without proving anything. And I noticed how the house felt lighter when I stopped resisting that awareness. As sunlight filled the room, the mirror lost its intensity. It became just glass again, quiet and neutral. The house settled into silence, but this time it felt different, not watchful, not heavy. I took a slow breath and stood still, allowing the moment to exist without explanation. Something honest had started to form, not loudly, not dramatically. The house didn't whisper yet. It was waiting, and so was I, but this time not for others. The house was quiet that morning, but not peacefully so. It was the kind of quiet that made every step sound deliberate, every breath feel noticed. I stood near the doorway longer than usual, keys resting in my palm, wondering why leaving felt heavier than it should have. Nothing was blocking me, yet something inside hesitated. For years, I had lived in this pattern, always available, always adjusting. I answered calls before they finished ringing. I filled silences before they grew uncomfortable. I told myself it was kindness, that being needed meant being valued. But standing there, surrounded by stillness, I felt the truth settle uncomfortably in my chest. I was tired, not physically, emotionally. The house seemed to sense it. The walls felt closer, the air denser, as if the space itself was reacting to my exhaustion. I walked inside instead of leaving, setting the keys down slowly. The mirror in the hallway caught my movement, reflecting my face with unsettling clarity. I avoided it, pretending to straighten something on the table, delaying the moment. I moved through the rooms without purpose, touching nothing, fixing nothing. Each room carried traces of who I had been, someone who gave quietly, endlessly, hoping it would be enough. The silence pressed gently, not accusing, just present. It felt like the house was waiting for me to notice something I had avoided for a long time. I sat down and allowed myself to stop. No distractions, no explanations, just stillness. The discomfort rose quickly, urging me to get up, to do something useful, to prove my worth again. But I stayed. In that stillness, a realization formed slowly. I had built my life around being chosen by others. I had learned to disappear just enough to remain needed. And now that habit felt heavier than the silence itself. The mirror reflected my stillness from across the room. For the first time, I didn't look away immediately. Something in my expression had changed. Not confidence, not clarity, but awareness. The house remained quiet, and something had begun.